What if the most powerful room in America wasn't in the White House, but behind the doors of a Manhattan mansion no one could fully explain? A man without a college degree builds a fortune that financial experts struggle to trace. He buys a private island, flies on private jets with presidents and princes, funds scientists, hosts billionaires. Then, just weeks before facing trial for federal sex trafficking charges, he's found dead in a jail cell. Cameras malfunction, guards fall asleep, and half the country stops believing what it's told. Was it suicide, or was it something far more uncomfortable, a glimpse into how power protects itself? This isn't just the story of a man, it's the story of influence, silence, and the collapse of trust surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. Nothing about his early life screamed future infamy. His parents were middle class. He attended public schools. There were no obvious signs of the empire he would later build, or the scandal that would eventually define his name. He briefly studied at Cooper Union, then later at NYU, but he never completed a degree. No diploma, no prestigious academic credentials. And yet, in the mid-1970s, he secured a teaching job at the elite Dalton School in Manhattan. Dalton wasn't just another private school. It was a pipeline into the upper crust of American society. Its hallways echoed with the conversations of children whose parents controlled banks, hedge funds, corporations, and political influence. For a young man with ambition, it was less a classroom and more a doorway. That doorway changed everything. At Dalton, Epstein learned something more valuable than any finance textbook could teach. Proximity to power creates opportunity. Access is currency. Relationships are leverage. Through connections made there, he transitioned into Wall Street, landing a job at Bear Stearns despite having no formal financial background. It was the late 1970s, an era of aggressive deals and expanding markets. Former colleagues would later describe him as confident, calculating, socially sharp. He understood people, he understood ambition, and he understood how to make himself useful to those with money. But he didn't stay long. By the early 1980s, Epstein left to form his own firm, J. Epstein & Co. He claimed he only managed the finances of billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires. It was an exclusive pitch, mysterious, almost theatrical. Yet for all the wealth surrounding him, clarity was strangely absent. Journalists would later ask, who exactly were his clients? How did he accumulate such staggering assets? Where did the capital originate? Concrete answers were elusive. Still, the lifestyle was undeniable. A Manhattan mansion reportedly valued at $77 million, a Paris apartment, a sprawling ranch in New Mexico, Palm Beach estates, and perhaps most famously, a private island in the Caribbean, Little St. James. The image was deliberate: power, privacy, exclusivity. And then there were the connections. Epstein became known as a connector. He cultivated relationships across politics, business, and academia. Among those who were socially associated with him at various times were former President Bill Clinton, former President Donald Trump, and Britain's Prince Andrew. It's important to distinguish association from accusation. Appearing in flight logs or attending events does not equal criminal guilt. But the presence of such high-profile names intensified public fascination and scrutiny. Epstein hosted gatherings that blended politicians with scientists, billionaires with academics. He positioned himself as a philanthropist funding scientific research, speaking about transhumanism and genetic studies, presenting himself as a patron of innovation. From the outside, it looked like influence at its highest tier. But beneath that polished surface, allegations were quietly building. In 2005, Palm Beach police received a complaint.
A 14-year-old girl reported being paid $200 for what began as a massage and became sexual in nature. Detectives began investigating, and the pattern expanded. More teenagers came forward, recruitment through other teens, cash payments, instructions to stay silent. Police recommended serious felony charges. And then something shifted. In 2008, Epstein reached a controversial plea agreement with federal prosecutors in Florida. Instead of facing potential federal trafficking charges, he pled guilty to state-level prostitution offenses. He served 13 months in jail. Under a work release arrangement, he was permitted to leave the facility for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. For many observers, it didn't resemble the consequences typically faced in comparable cases. Victims later stated they were not informed about the federal non-prosecution agreement at the time it was finalized. Years later, a federal judge ruled that prosecutors had violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act by failing to properly notify them. The plea deal would become a symbol, fairly or not, of unequal justice. And then, almost as quietly as it had erupted, the case faded from national headlines. Epstein returned to his social circles. Some associates distanced themselves, others maintained contact. Media attention waned. The world moved on. But unresolved stories rarely disappear forever. A decade later, investigative reporting would reopen wounds that never truly healed.
In 2018, the silence cracked. The Miami Herald published a detailed investigative series re-examining the 2008 plea deal. Reporters interviewed victims, they reviewed court documents, they asked the questions that had never fully gone away. Why had federal prosecutors stepped back? Who had negotiated the agreement? And why did it feel like the story had been buried? Public outrage reignited almost overnight. Suddenly, what had once seemed like a closed chapter reopened on a national stage. Federal authorities in New York began building a new case. The political climate had shifted. The cultural conversation about abuse, power, and accountability had changed. And this time, the spotlight was far brighter. In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey and charged in federal court in New York with sex trafficking and conspiracy. Prosecutors alleged that between 2002 and 2005, he had operated a scheme that exploited underage girls, paying them for sexual acts at his properties in Manhattan and Palm Beach. He pleaded not guilty. Bail was denied. The judge cited both flight risk and danger to the community. Epstein was remanded to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, a federal jail facility just blocks from the courthouse where he was expected to stand trial. For the first time, it appeared he would face a full federal prosecution. He was looking at up to 45 years in prison. The world prepared for revelations, names, evidence, testimony under oath. Many believed the upcoming trial would expose not only Epstein's actions, but the broader network surrounding him. And then, on August 10, 2019, the story took its most dramatic turn. Epstein was found unresponsive in his jail cell. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The official ruling from the New York City medical examiner: suicide by hanging. But almost immediately, questions multiplied. Reports emerged that guards had allegedly failed to conduct required checks during the night. Surveillance cameras outside the cell were said to have malfunctioned. Epstein had previously been placed on suicide watch after an earlier incident, then removed days before his death. The Department of Justice launched investigations. The FBI examined the circumstances. Ultimately, federal authorities concluded that Epstein had died by suicide. 2 correctional officers were later charged with falsifying records related to required inmate checks.
Yet for a significant portion of the public, doubt lingered. The combination of wealth, high-profile associations, and procedural irregularities created a vacuum where speculation thrived. In that vacuum, distrust flourished. If the trial never happened, what would remain unknown? What evidence would never be tested in court? What testimony would never be heard? As the legal proceedings against Epstein ended with his death, attention shifted to another figure long linked to him, Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell, a British socialite and longtime associate of Epstein, was accused of recruiting underage girls and facilitating abuse. In 2021, she was convicted in federal court on multiple sex trafficking-related charges. Her trial introduced detailed testimony from victims describing recruitment patterns, manipulation, and coordination. It reinforced a central reality. This was not presented in court as a one-person operation. It involved structure. It involved assistance. It involved systems. Meanwhile, Epstein's private island, Little St. James, became a symbol of secrecy. Flight logs were examined and re-examined by media outlets and independent researchers. Politicians, academics, business leaders. Names surfaced in headlines, often without full context. It is crucial to separate allegation from adjudication. Being mentioned in documents or appearing in flight records does not establish criminal wrongdoing. Legal experts repeatedly emphasized that distinction. But in the public arena, nuance often struggles against spectacle. Court documents unsealed in subsequent years listed individuals referenced in depositions and testimony. Media cycles amplified the most recognizable names. Social media accelerated interpretation, sometimes without legal clarity. And beneath it all was a deeper unease. How had this operated for years? Did wealth shield accountability? Did institutions, legal, financial, social, fail to intervene earlier? The case ignited debates about prosecutorial discretion, about the influence of elite networks, about oversight inside federal detention facilities, about the responsibility of media in balancing transparency with accuracy. Then came the phrase that spread across the internet like wildfire: Epstein didn't kill himself. It appeared in memes, in late-night monologues, in political commentary. It became a punchline, but also a reflection of something more serious, a growing skepticism towards official explanations, a widening gap between institutions and public trust. When a case touches billionaires, presidents, royalty, and federal agencies all at once, it stops being just criminal law. It becomes cultural. Civil lawsuits followed Epstein's death. Settlement funds were established to compensate survivors. Some survivors received financial restitution, but money cannot fully account for years of trauma, coercion, and silence. Many survivors said what mattered most was being heard. Their testimonies reshaped public understanding of grooming patterns, recruitment tactics, and how exploitation can hide behind wealth and prestige. They forced institutions to re-examine policies. They encouraged other victims nationwide to come forward in unrelated cases. And yet, one undeniable fact remains. Jeffrey Epstein never stood trial for the 2019 federal charges. No cross-examination, no public airing of every detail, no final verdict delivered in open court. That absence left space for speculation, space for doubt, space for unresolved questions. But perhaps the most significant legacy of this case is not found in conspiracy theories or celebrity associations. It is found in the uncomfortable spotlight it turned on systems. Systems that sometimes defer to power. Systems that may hesitate when influence enters the room. Systems that rely on transparency to maintain public faith. History will remember the name Jeffrey Epstein, but it may remember something else even stronger: the moment trust fractured. Because corruption rarely survives alone. It survives in networks. It survives in silence. It survives when oversight fails and when influence outweighs scrutiny. And when silence finally breaks, the shock isn't just about what was hidden. It's about realizing how long it stayed hidden.